And welcome back to Sullivan's Unheard Voices. I'm here with Kendra. Um, the reason I wanted you to be here and talk today were twofold. One, hands down, you're one of the kindest people that I know. Like, I remember you were watching something I posted on Facebook, and like without any prompting, you're like, "Oh, let's get a fundraiser going," and all this other stuff. And I'm like, like only Kendra would be like thinking about everybody else before she thinks about herself. And I just wanted to say how much I appreciate that as a fellow human being who is driven by kindness.
Thank
Has it
you.
always been that way for you?
You know what? I hate to like make it sound that way, but yeah, I just
Yeah.
have this like it's really even hard for me to get like mad at people. And even when if somebody has done something has wronged me in some way, it's just so easy for me to forgive people. And I truly, honestly believe that is one of my gifts.
Yeah.
Empathy and forgiveness. And I just, well, and like for like when I met you and we all started kind of like hanging out,
Yeah.
I was just like, you have this infectious like aura around you. And I'm like, who is this guy? And I was just like, and I've just had fun ever since.
Yeah.
So it's been great.
I appreciate that because I try my best to live by that now that I have the ability to.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I can't wait to have a podcast where I can actually talk about that, but that's
Oh,
coming, y'all. Um, but you have a very unique story.
I do.
Yeah. And you tell us a little bit about what it was like growing up in this area because you're originally from Salem, right?
I was born in Dallas, Oregon, and then my parents had gotten divorced. I believe I was in second grade, and we lived in Salem, right here on 13th Street, actually. And then they got divorced. I moved to Silverton, and I grew up there from fourth grade up until my like second month in my freshman year, and then I moved. My mom got divorced, so we went to go live with our dad, and then we went to Ohio, Kentucky, and then I was back here when I was 17.
Okay.
But pretty much I've been here my whole life.
Right. And
So,
then when you came back here, what was that like?
well, a few things have changed, even though I had only been gone for like a couple of years. But like Silverton, like growing up there was like everybody knows everybody, and it was like that we could be out all hours of the night,
Yeah.
pretty much. But then when I came back, I was like actually living in Salem, and I've never really lived in Salem, and I came back married and pregnant.
Okay.
So it was a little different. When I moved down there, I met this guy or whatever, and the next thing you know, I'm getting married my junior year. And I'm like, this doesn't happen where I'm from. Like,
Yeah.
people are not pregnant in schools. And there were people that were pregnant in schools. I'm like, this is like unheard of. And then that happened my junior year. I got married, got pregnant, and then didn't really work out. So then I came back here 17 and living with my mom again. And I've been here since.
And then talk about like when you that transition, right? So like a lot of people don't understand how difficult it is to be a mother so young.
Yeah. And you know what's really crazy is that I wanted that. I
Yeah.
wanted to get pregnant. I wanted to get married, but when I look back, honestly, it was for the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
And I won't go like too much into it, but like I was in a situation where, I was living with my dad, and it's not the kind of father-daughter relationship that you want. It's the kind that you're scared of. Because you're afraid to be alone with him, type. And so I think that was my motivation to get married so quickly, because I just wanted to get out of the house. So I did that, and then he went off and worked with his father in Ohio, which is like, and I was living in Kentucky at the time, so it was like I don't know, like a 3-hour commute. But he'd be gone all month, and I'd be stuck at this house with his mom, and like I barely know her. We're married, and it was really depressing. I was like severely depressed. I'm like, I can't do this with pregnant and stuff, and he wasn't willing to change. So that's why I came back to Oregon, and then like everything in my life has happened since I've been here.
And then what was it like? So when you got here, what happened when you got here?
So my mom, the workaholic that she was living like she was kind of like renting like a basement out of some house. And so I remember like it's kind of depressing. I remember being in this recliner and being pregnant and just laying there and having to be really quiet because she's sleeping. And then I I became really depressed. And so long story short, I ended up going into a home where it was called St. Bridges, or it
Yeah.
was a home for teens. And then when my aunt found out that I was living there, she showed up and get your stuff and
Yeah.
you're moving in with me. And then that's how I moved in with her. She had to leave to take care of my her mom, which is my grandma, and she just gave me her apartment. And I thought, oh my gosh, I have my own place. And then I lost that all in just a couple months because, young.
Yeah.
Housewarming party, one night lasted 2 months and an eviction. So, yeah.
And I don't, I think a lot of things, something that people tend to not understand is depression and isolation go hand in hand. So when you are in a position where you're stuck in a house, you're not having frequent conversations with people, you're kind of,
Yeah,
that leads to depression like 90% of the time. And I could see
absolutely.
100% just like need to get the hell out of here.
Yeah, and even though his mom was really nice, she was like hardcore like Christian,
Mhm.
which, that's awesome, but she was like severely depressed herself. So she would literally stay in a room all day. The house would be dark. There was a certain way to do the dishes. The dishes couldn't touch the sink. I mean, she was one
Okay.
of those like OCD, like, and it's just as a 17-year-old, like, and then your husband off and you're like dealing with a family that you don't know and you're stuck in a room all day, all night for just days in. It was
It's too much.
way too
It's too much
much.
for any human being.
It really was.
And so what happened when you got evicted then?
So then, well, right before then, I had met my middle son's father, and he lived in like the apartment that was like there's two sections, like 4 and 4, and so the landlord's like, "I'll even give you an excellent reference. Just leave, like get out of here." Because well, the person that lived underneath me, she was like 80 something years old, and
Yeah.
poor thing. So he's like, just move in with me. And I was like, okay. So I go in there, and then when the landlord would show up or whatever, I would duck and hide. And this went on for a couple of months until we got our own place in West Salem. And then, yeah, I ended up getting pregnant with my second child with him. And we were together for like 6 years. And then, eventually things that, we just kind of went our separate ways. And
Yeah.
yeah, then I met my third.
So how did you end up on the one side of the law?
So my whole life, I've never been in trouble, and not to say that I was like completely innocent, but for the most part, I was a great kid.
Yeah.
I was like really into sports. Even though I could probably take my mom out, I knew better than to talk back to her or anything like that. So I was a pretty good kid. And then I don't know, I met my ex-husband, and let's see, by then, I mean, I didn't even like really touch a drug until I was like 19. I had like tried, I think, like pot, like once or twice. And I didn't like it. And I was just like, I
Yeah.
don't want anything to do with it. So when I had met him, um I had been on my own, for barely a year. So okay, mind you, I went from being married and legally married to somebody else, to my middle son's father, which we were together for 6 years. And then he cheated on me and blah, blah, blah. So whatever, we're all great friends now.
Yeah.
And then I was barely single for a year when I met Jesse, and he was barely single for a year. And then just started, by then I was like kind of like dabbling into some drugs, and he had never been in trouble either. And then one night he got pulled over or whatever and got in trouble. And when he got out of jail, he found, he got a job through where my mom worked. My mom was a caretaker for years and years and years. And right after he got hired, he had gotten in trouble with the law.
Yeah.
And so then, we started to get to know each other. One thing led to the other. And then I was pregnant with another baby. All my boys were 4 years apart. And then we end up moving, in together. And then I started doing more of the heavier drugs, like, meth. And he was like, he was he was given it as a birthday present from a friend of his to make it. So that's where my prison story comes from. It all stems from a gift that was given to him that I was around, even though I didn't want him to do it, and multiple discussions, but I was a part of it. No matter how I look at it, I was a part of it. So when we got busted on my son's first birthday, and it was brutal. It was really hard. They shut down the entire Sunnyview, Brown, the entire area. Helicopters.
For what?
Well, apparently they had probably been watching us for a while. And so there was undercover informants. And then one day, it was, like I said, it was Cody's birthday. And I remember coming down the stairs, and I'm not even kidding you. I looked at the kitchen. Everything was so nice and clean because I'm getting ready for a big old birthday party.
Yeah.
And I look out the window, and all I see is just massive blue with shields and I was terrified, terrified. And then a boom, boom, boom. And we had a dog that we took in from the friend that taught him how to cook the stuff. And if you didn't know him, the dog could be dangerous. So the cops were already all over him. And I was so worried that they were going to hurt him. But they're like, hey, we're looking for so-and-so. And I'm like, he's not here. He's out shopping for her son's birthday. And fast forward, they pulled them all out of the garage right after they just got done cooking drugs. So then they put up a tent. We all had to get in there one by one, completely naked, hosed off with the fire hose, even my own children.
Wait.
And I was mortified. And they shut the power down all over that area. And the next thing you know, I'm in a paper suit on my way to jail. And I've never even been in trouble. And that was hard. And sad because I've been in the ratings, the holding cell for so many hours. And when we came out to be fingerprinted, right when I sat down, the news, literally, it was weird. And I looked, and the news was on, and there was our story. And the person, interviewing our neighbors. And I just feel sad for the boy that goes to school every morning, which was my oldest son, which was really hard. But I was supposed to get, 18 months, zero tolerance probation. But one of the women that, got arrested with us knew some chick in the jail and was telling her about some stuff. And she was actually an undercover informant.
Okay.
So she went and told, and my little zero tolerance probation. So I went to court thinking, I'm going to get out of here today. Went to 43 months. And that's where my little prison, but because I'd never been in trouble, I got into a program right away. So I did 4 months in county and 4 months at Coffee Creek. And then I did 6 months at Shutter Creek, which is a boot camp. And I shaved off all my hair. I didn't care. Whatever it took to get my kids back. And I graduated. I think we started off with 83 people, men, and there's 4 or 5 of us girls, and the rest of them were men. And only 30 of us graduated. Everybody else went back to prison.
So that's a program that's sort of like an outpatient kind of program where you're outside of jail with that program? Or
No, you're still in jail.
You're still in jail.
Even on the facility, it's a men's prison, which I didn't know. I'm just we get to see the ocean.
Yeah.
And we got to go out and work crew. But it was we had to talk in third person. We had to march everywhere. We couldn't touch our beds until a certain time. I mean, it was very, very military style.
Yeah.
And then, I found out probably about so there's a new group that comes every 3 months because it's 3 months. And then there was one more group that came out after me. And then after that, the women's prison, Coffee Creek, started their own. So nobody had to shave their hair, none of that. But
so in order, so let me pause for a second and back up.
Yeah.
They made you shave your head?
No, it's voluntary, but you have to in order to be in the program. So it's my choice to do it, but it was mandatory.
So it's kind of mandatory, but not mandatory.
Yeah, I could have said no.
And that's because it was in the men's prison and they didn't want you to...
No, I think it was honestly, I think it was built, eventually they took a lot of things out, and looking back, I'm those people wouldn't have got the same thing that I got out of that program because they didn't have to talk in third person and everything was so different. I'm no, that was the whole great structure about being in boot camp it was awful. It was horrible. But once you got used to it, it's you wanted it. You wanted that I don't know, discipline.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was my choice to do it. But it had to be less than 2 inches at all times. So I think one of the girls, her hair started growing out a little bit, and so on haircut day, like the men had to do, she had to get her hair cut. I didn't have to because mine didn't grow fast enough. But
Okay.
yeah, I think it's just a way of just stripping you of everything, and starting from the bottom and working your way back
And
up.
that's kind of why I wanted to pause for a second there, because it sounds very similar to my experience in basic training. Very similar. Like the first thing they do is not only do they strip you down and shave you completely bald so that everybody's the same,
Mm-hmm.
the same kind of rules apply. You sort of talk in that third person, you only lose last names, you don't use first names. It's very
Exactly.
impersonal. And it's kind of weird. And at first you're terrified, you're frightened, but then like by week 4, you're like, I think I can do this.
Yeah, I was a little worried because I had heard some stories from all kinds of people. That program had been going on for a long time, and um, I was I was a little like worried because I heard that if you couldn't like pass certain tests, or if you couldn't do, that you could
Yeah.
lose your program, and I'm like, oh my goodness, and we'd have to like remember how to cite things and like read it, and like and that's what I was worried about, but it wasn't quite like I had heard. But all in all, it was a good program. I just remember it was right after, I think I was there 4 days, and it was my birthday. And I remember we were marching down a hill, and I remember just looking up, 'cause somebody was walking on the side of our like platoon, and I looked over, and the next thing I know, my entire squad is in front leaning rest because I looked over at a guy that was walking by. My CO called me out on it and said, "Are you trying to hook up with somebody while you're here?" And like literally made me feel so little. And he's like, "You can lose your program today." And all I kept thinking about was my kids, because at the time I heard, my kids were staying with so and so and so and so, and the next thing you know, they each might go to a different state. And I'm like, I got to get my kids back. I got to get my kids back. So I was so scared of losing my program. And it was embarrassing. Everybody's like just standing there waiting on me. That was my impression on the whole squad.
And the part I struggle with in this whole story, right, is if you take a step back and you look at it from an outsider's perspective, the idea that you weren't given a chance to have some sort of a diversion program, to stay with your kids and get out of the relationship and thing that you were in,
Yeah.
and to get out of the situation, and to sort of like look at you as a parent who's trying and struggling in this impoverished sort of realm. And the fact that they didn't offer that to you and they went straight to that really kind of pisses me off. I'm sorry to say.
No, and you know what? Honestly, I kind of felt the same way. And I'm like, hello, do I need to remind you? I've never been in trouble a
Yeah.
day in my life. And then somebody called me out and they're like, you've never been in trouble a day of your life that you were caught. And I'm like, touche. I wasn't innocent, but for the most part, I was a pretty good person.
But sometimes it's the caught part
Yeah.
that is the impetus for change.
And that would have been enough for me because I was scared shit. I was scared.
Oh, you can curse.
Okay.
I don't care.
Yeah, I was scared shitless. And I'm like, oh my God, just the idea of my kids getting taken away. Oh
Yeah.
my God. But no, and for whatever reason, I had to go through it. And it was such a great program. Like it really
Yeah.
did change me. Like it was amazing.
And I'm glad you went through it. And I'm glad you're at where the point you're at now in your life. I really am. It just still really upsets me that it took that sort of a thing, because I think like they could have got you in a similar program
Yeah.
without the prison part
I
beforehand.
think so too. And which is kind of brings me up to my next point. But there was also it was that this was in 2005. So
Yeah.
that's when things started, like when the whole like meth crisis was just surfacing, but it was enough to where they were like, okay, we got to do something about this. So the judge, when they sentenced us, said, she's like, we're making an example. There were 7 of us. And so, and my ex, we weren't married at the time, but we got married later on. He tried to take the blame for all of us. He tried to and he pled guilty right away. He was off to prison within 3 weeks. The rest of us there were like 4 or 5 months doing our little cases. But so I think that's probably why, because it was such a big thing starting to happen, and they wanted to make an example out of us. But I would have like maybe offer me some treatment or something, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially when you see how the pendulum shifted, right? And
Yes.
now, like, people don't get in trouble for that. And there's like all of this other thing. Like, how much of a mind fuck is that? I'm sorry to say, but like,
No, it's
oh my
true. And when
God.
they like did that law where
Yeah.
you could have, and it's just like people had been talking about that for years for pot for
Yeah.
people who are in jail. It was like it's just a waste of space, and it was never really my thing. So I was just like, okay, but yeah, it would have been nice. But I even going through the stuff that I went through at that time,
Yeah.
who knows? I might have been like, oh, well, I got in trouble, but I didn't really get in trouble. And who would have, I don't know. I don't know what I would have done back then, but it all happened for a reason. But I do know that when I was there, if the DHS worker came up or they were trying to take my rights away right away. Like I didn't even have a chance. They're like, well, because of the amount of time you got, you need to sign over your parental rights. If you don't, we'll take them.
Yeah.
And then you won't get nothing. You won't even get like a letter about your kid. And I was scared to death. And I remember praying about it and praying. And my attorney showed up and he's like, I don't know what else to do. And I was like, okay. And I signed all this paperwork. And I just remember going to bed like just ill. I'm like, I just signed my kids over,
Yeah.
And so long story short, about 4 weeks later, the DHS worker came up and she's like, well, your attorney's incompetent. He didn't have a date on the paperwork. He didn't have this. He didn't have this. So I need you to redo this. And I'm like, time out. No. Something told me, and I knew I had a feeling. I swear on my life, I had a feeling I was going to get in one of those programs and I was going to cut all my time in, like way. And
Yeah.
so I'm like, no. She was pregnant with twins. And she's like, well, you already did. So I'm like, I did, but I've been here for a minute. And I'm like, what would you do?
Yeah.
She goes, well, I wouldn't be cooking meth with my kids around. I'm like, fair enough. And that's true. I mean, that is true.
I understand that's true, right? And I used to work in child welfare, right?
Okay.
And so when I hear stories like that, like how insensitive is that
Oh, and
person
she was
to
very.
just say that? I mean, like you're talking to a mother here.
She was a first
Like,
time mother too. So
yeah,
maybe that was it. I don't know.
even so, like
Yeah.
just no empathy towards the situation.
Yeah.
That helps no one.
Yeah.
No one.
And I kept telling her, I'm like, I'm not going to sign. I'm like, I've talked to so many women in here. They're like, why did you sign? I'm like, well, I felt like that's was my only choice. And I had this amount of time and I had to do it right now. And so that I'm still pissed off because I was so pressured. And I was thinking I'd rather have something than nothing, with my
Yeah.
kids. And so you're not going to believe this. So she's like, well, I need you to sign these papers. I'm like, I'm not going to do it. I'm sorry, but I have a feeling I'm going to go into the program. She's like, well, what kind of program? And I go, what would you do? And she's like, well, I would fight. And I go, well, that's what I'm doing. I'm fighting right now.
100%.
And she's like, and after we talked for a while, it was like a different person. She was amazing. And she's like, I'm going to go back. She's like, I've never done this the whole time I worked here. I'm going to go back and I'm going to talk to my boss. And 4 days later, I got called for that boot camp, which saved my time, which I could get my kids. So,
and that I think is a testament to you and your character, right? And it's also a testament as to why people should come to the door with curiosity instead of judgment. Because when you bring judgment first, you don't get to the other side of the story. You don't get the full picture of what's going on. You get this tiny sliver. You've already made up your mind. You're on to the next. And that does nobody any good. So, like, check your judgment at the door because you have no idea what any person has gone through to get to this moment today. You don't know how much garbage, how much they've had to fight, how much they've had to put up with just to be where they're at today. So to not have that conversation or even talk about that stuff is just a disservice to anybody going through that situation.
And you know what? It was an eye opener for me too, because honestly, if that hadn't happened to me and say, I don't know, I was at the grocery store and maybe some guy came by and said, oh, do you need help grabbing that?
Yeah.
And then we started talking and maybe, he mentioned the word prison. I'd be like, oh. So it was an eye opener for me too. And even though I've always been pretty open-minded, like, and very unjudgmental,
Yeah.
I can't even express how, like, I feel like that's probably why I have a lot of people that come to me with their problems and stuff, because I'm able to just not judge. And sometimes I wish I could. I really do. I know that sounds
No,
bad,
no,
but
okay.
I don't want to be so much where I'm like so understanding, because I want to be like, that is wrong. I can't believe that you think like that,
Yeah.
but I can't do it. And it drives me nuts.
I chuckle because I relate to that statement so much. Like, and tell me if this is your experience, because
Okay.
this is my experience on this planet, right? Hi, I'm Sean. Nice to meet you. And then the person word vomits their entire trauma history every single time. And I like, what kind of face do I have? What am I tone am I getting to have you trauma vomit when I'm not prepared for it?
It's the aura. It's the
It's gotta
aura
be.
about you, because
It's
even
yeah,
when I first met you, I'm like, who is this guy? And I
yeah,
want to hang out with him. Like, and I want to, and then I call it the karaoke club.
yeah,
But there's just certain people that people are just drawn to. And I know that because I've seen it.
yeah.
So it's
And,
crazy.
and I'm always drawn to people that are nice to other people. That's the people
Yes.
I want to be around. Like,
Yeah.
I don't want to be around negative people. Like, I did that to myself for 20 years in a relationship that was really bad. And I'm never going to do that again. Like, I'm never. Like, I am going to be me. I'm going to be the kind person that I want to be. I'm going to give people the time of day and just be nice. And ever since I made that shift of saying, I'm not listening to the other half and tell me I shouldn't be nice, I'm going to be nice. And life has been like you're saying, like things have just happened, like the unexpected. Like, how the hell did I get here?
Yeah.
I just turned left one day and now I'm here. Yeah.
It's like I'm out of the hills have eyes,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
there's another one around the corner. But it's just getting through that one obstacle to another, and just learning and growing and observing. And I mean, not to sound like this probably sounds bad, but I just wish that more people would be like that. Like,
Yeah.
would be not like us, like I'm so perfect, because I promise you, I'm not even
Oh,
anywhere close.
100%.
But I mean, just empathy wise,
Yeah.
and like even just being at the bar, like being outside in the back, and hearing someone just be like, "Oh my gosh, did you see it?" And it's just like, "Oh my gosh, are we really doing this?" Like, it's sad.
It takes way more effort to be that
Yep,
way than it is to just let people be people. Yeah. It's so
absolutely.
when you got out and you got into that program, like how has it been since you've been out? Has it been hard? Like, do people still like on the employment side? Do people still judge you for that past?
Well, that was one of the big things, because that was one of the biggest things I was worried about when I got out. And this is going to sound really bad, but I said I would be honest. When I got out, again, well, I went from like 128 pounds to like 210.
Okay.
So I was big. And then my hair was like almost like down to my waist. And now I'm like less than 2 inches. So I'm thinking everybody's going to be looking at me like, like like a bull,
Yeah.
like a bull chick, and I'm just like, and I was mortified, because I'm like, no guy's gonna ever want to date me, even though I was still with my ex, my ex-husband. um but I worried so much on the way I looked, and I kept thinking, well, it doesn't matter, this is for your kids, but I just the other obstacle was like, I have to tell people like I have a criminal history,
Yeah.
and that's when it was adamant you have to tell them on the application. And so my first job, the only job I got out when I first, and if I didn't get a job within 30 days, that could be a violation, because even though I graduated from the program, you had 3 months of zero tolerance. So if you got in trouble, I don't even care if it was a curfew thing.
Right.
You go back to prison and go do the rest of your time. So I'm like walking on pins and needles, and I'm scared, and they're like, you have to have a job within 30 days.
I can only imagine the level of stress.
It is. And of course, it's not like they just said, oh, you're out, here's your kids. No,
Yeah.
I had to work for months, and I had to do an outpatient treatment for 9 months, even though I just did an intensive treatment in prison.
Yeah.
So I had to do all these things. And then we're going on like day 29, and I still don't have a job, and I'm freaking out. And I went to this, and my unemployment agent called me. He's like, I got a lead for you, check this out. So I went there, did an interview, just did the prison thing right out of the bat. And I'm like, please, I'm really just looking for someone to give me a chance. I'm like, this is not who I am. I made a bad decisions. And so she hired me. It was a lobby firm, and I was there for 11 years. And then I was also a supervisor. And I had my own department, did all of that, my own little employees and all that.
Yeah.
But 11 years. And then I asked her why she hired me. And she goes, well, honestly, she goes, you sounded really desperate. And when I told her why, I'm like, I was looking at another day or two. And if I didn't have a job, I was going to go back to prison.
Yeah.
And she's like, and I don't know, I liked your energy. And I was like, okay. So I didn't really have to ever use that, like, oh, I have a criminal history, because I was there for so long.
Yeah.
And now that's not really I don't think it's a requirement anymore. But on October 14th, it was 19 years ago. So
Okay.
it's been a while, but it was hard at first, because I'm like, people are gonna know.
And the reason I wanted you to say something about that is because I think people don't understand. Like, if you take a step back and look at it, right?
Mhm.
You're coming out of jail. You've done your time to your service. You've done all of this extra work that a lot of people in prison don't do to get your life back. And then when you get out, there's no pathway for you. There's no support structure to sort of find that first job for you. There's no sort of wraparound services. And it's just like you're setting people up for failure because you're not supporting them through this transition. And a lot of that has to do with these negative myths and negative stereotypes that people don't like. People assume, and it comes back to that judgment piece, like the judgment in the first place. And I totally agree. Sucks.
And I remember checking in with my PO all the time. And, I got in trouble a couple times when I was on parole,
Yeah.
Drinking some wine. I remember my PO showing up, and she was really cool. And she was younger than me, which was even harder, because I'm like, look at this Barbie doll, but she was really cool. And she showed up, and it was the one weekend where, at the time, my husband was at a handball tournament. I'm like, and he did not, when he got out of prison, not only did he change, but he changed, he's basically like a pastor now.
A complete 180.
Yeah. And I, on the other hand, I still have some of my bad habits, but I just remember feeling like she showed up, and she's like, this is just random. She's like, I'm just doing some rounds. And I'm like, okay. And I remember her asking me for a UA, which is no big deal. I was like, okay. But I was a little worried because, after 3 years of parole I was on. So for the first 2 years, nothing, and then I finally caved into one little party, and someone asked me, hey, you want to smoke some pot? I'm like, nah, it's not my thing, or whatever. But I ended up doing it. I took 2 hits, and I was so out of my mind. I'm like, oh my God, how am I going to explain this? Well, she shows up 6 weeks later. So I'm like, oh, I should be good. And so I do this UA, and she's like, hi, is there anything you want to tell me? And I'm like, no. And she's like, I'm going to ask you again. She's like, have you been around anybody that smoked pot? And I'm like, maybe. And I was like, okay, fine. I took 2 hits, but this is almost 2 months ago. And she's like, why didn't you just tell me that? I'm like, honestly, would you honestly believe me if I said I took 2 hits of weed? She's like, yeah, looking at your test results. I'm like, because you're looking at my test results. But if you didn't have that, would you believe me? And she's like, no. And I go, that's why.
Yeah.
That's why. And just like the night that I got in trouble when I was on parole, I was walking down the street, and an officer stopped me and said I didn't look like I was old enough to be out past curfew. I was almost 30 years old. So I'm like, this is ridiculous. This is in Kaiser. So I'm like, fine. He's like, are you on parole? That's what they ask. I'm like, yeah, I'm on parole. And they're like, okay, have you been drinking or, doing any drugs? And to this day, I still don't know why, but I had this much of a beer, not even that much. And I told him I had 3 beers because I knew he would not believe me if I told him I had this much of a beer. So I got a sanction. I had to go in. I had to do 5 days in jail. And it was enough to disrupt where my ex was graduating from the same program that I did.
Yeah.
But at this point now, I can't be around him because they don't want me around him because I did bad. So that really hurt because I'm like, if I would have just told the truth, but I still don't think that they would have believed me. So I did get in trouble twice. once.
Which also kind of like I get the whole idea about parole and all that other stuff too, but like how many people on this planet can go 2 years without a drink on their birthday? Like
Yeah.
it seems like it's almost like unsustainable. Like 3 years? Like three
Yeah, and I got
years?
busted for drugs. I get it, but like this is alcohol. But you know what they say? It's one goes with the other, the other, the other. Maybe for
Maybe.
some people, but
Yeah.
not. We're not all programmed like that, you
Yeah.
know. But
Hmm.
it is what it is. And I got in trouble, and I was like, "That's it. I'm done. I'm waiting till I get off parole."
Yeah.
And I did. I got off early, um, and I have not been in trouble since.
So take me through that day that you got off of parole. How did that feel? Like, did you
Um,
party? Did you not party,
no,
but
but
celebrate?
not really. I mean, at that point, I was already kind of like from that one party that I had that little amount of beer. It was like okay, but I think it was that summer. I was hanging out with a friend. In fact, he was the only guy that went into the house that they, you know, I guess once you've been busted in a drug house, they tape it off, and if like meth has been cooked, the house is condemned and they have to
Yeah.
tear it down. Well, it was like 10 years and they finally tore down the house. It was vacant the whole time. But when I was in prison, he went in there and he took some pictures off the wall and he sent them to me. So I was hanging out with him all summer. We kind of caught feelings or whatever. And he's like, come on, you know, like have a drink. I'm like, no, I'm on parole. He's like, so what? It's out of your system in 24 hours. I'm like, no. And then
Yeah.
that's where it started. So for years, and I mean like up until now, but not so much now, but throughout my whole marriage, I'd be over here like, you know, having a beer or two. And he was like sobriety 1000%.
Yeah.
And when he found out, he didn't like it. And so ultimately, long story short, I think that was a part of why after 17 years, he just, but I don't even think it was just so much the alcohol. There's other things involved, but so I did, like I said, I'm not perfect. And I mean, now that I have the opportunity to do whatever I want, whenever I want, especially since I'm single and like I'm not in a relationship, like married and all that, I can do whatever I want. And now is the time that I don't really drink anymore. So I'm like,
Yeah.
but it's growth. It's growth.
100%. Yeah. And it's a different sort of ball game too. Like when you finally realize those toxic relationships were toxic
Yeah.
and the like because I think people who are kind have a susceptibility to be taken advantage of by people who are power and control kind of people. And I
Which is,
see
it
it a lot.
frustrates me, you know,
Yeah.
because I don't know about with your experience, but I feel not only taken advantage of, but I feel like in a moment where I really can get emotional, like upset, it takes like a lot for me to get really angry. But I just feel like sometimes, like, say you're hanging out with your friends or whatever, and it's your friends that you know, and you're always hearing about their stuff. You're always hearing about their issues or whatever.
Yeah.
And, or if you say something, they're like, maybe say like I'm a Trump fan and they're like a hardcore Democrat and they're just like tearing through or whatever. And I'm just like, okay, calm down. Or maybe you just disagree with one of your friends. And then all of a sudden, or maybe I'm just having a bad day and I'm
Yeah.
actually like being a bitch, but not really. I'm just like, yep, I'm fine.
Standoffish and
Yeah. And it's like, whoa, what is wrong with you? And it's such a big deal. It's like, okay, how many freakouts have you had? How many times have I calmed you down? But I get upset or emotional about one thing and I'm so dramatic, like something's going on with me. And it's like, that's what hurts me the most. It's like, you guys do that to me all the time. And I can't one day because there's something wrong with me. And that's what hurts me. Because
yeah.
why can't I have a bad day? But when I have a bad day, it's like, oh my God, did you see what,
I hear that a lot.
it's just
Like, uh,
frustrating. I'm human too.
yeah, and I'm pretty. vocal about what I'm going through on social media just because I want other people to see that, there are times where mental health is, needs to have more priority, and some days are worse than others. And I still get to this day people who reach out on the side and say, you shouldn't be saying that. Like, you shouldn't be doing that. I'm like, I'm not going to portray a public persona that I'm not,
Exactly.
but that's what they kind of expect you to do.
Yeah.
It gets frustrating.
It is. And it's just like, when I have one freak out, everybody makes such a big deal about, but I don't want to say burden. I have been dumped with all kinds of so and so and so and so and so, and and I know like so many secrets that my mind can just go boom. And I love the fact that people trust me enough to come to me, and I love that I can talk people down from alleged to say, but sometimes I don't feel like I don't have that for me. And when I do, I do have a couple friends around that it's nice to have, but I don't know. It's different.
At some point, I would like to have a relationship where nurturing is back and forth and not just one-sided.
Yeah.
And that seems to be harder to find than I thought would be possible.
I totally agree, because I'm one of those people that are like, I don't care what so-and-so thinks and so-and-so. And I really don't. But I do care if someone is like thinking or feeling or saying something about me coming off as rude or mean, because I'm so opposite that I want like they don't normally. No, they don't normally.
Right,
but there are, like example. What was it yesterday? Yesterday or the day before, whatever. I went to Arco. I think I was getting. I think I was there to use the bathroom or something, and there was a guy standing outside the store. And he's like, hey, yo, hey. And I was like, hey, oh, hey. And he's like, fuck you, bitch. And I'm like, I was just trying to reciprocate the energy, but it was too much for him. But he was just like, he was like, fuck you, like, suck my dick. And I'm like,
wow.
Whoa. And I was like, okay. And so I just walked in, and then my friend was using the bathroom. I was standing there, and I looked out the window, and he was standing right there, and he kept looking in, and he was just like, just getting all mad. I'm like, okay, well, he obviously doesn't know me, but if you can talk to me like that, why can't I like do that back to you? And I wasn't being rude. I was just like, hey, oh, and that did not go well at all. But at the end, he did apologize.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's just weird how it's okay for somebody to do this, but if I was to do it, it's such a big deal. I don't want to sound like a victim, because I'm not.
No, but I totally understand what you're going through, though, right? So because it's like you're not allowed to express yourself unless you're expressing it in a very specific way that everybody else somehow or another says you're supposed to.
Yeah, and I'm a stuffer. I let things build, and then and maybe that's a problem. And I promised myself this year, I'm like, this year I'm gonna start telling people how I feel.
Yeah,
I'm gonna start, I'm gonna start just doing this and doing that. But I've done it a couple times, and I was really proud of myself. And other times I'm just like, and then I've never been able to do it my whole life. So it's not that I'm afraid of like what someone's going to think of me, or they might not be my friends. I have so many friends. I'm not worried about that. The idea of hurting someone or making someone feel, it
wrecks your whole day.
It does.
Yeah.
It does.
Yeah. And I've been in situations where I've said something and it wrecked that person's day, and it wrecked my whole week. And it's like unintended. Like, I didn't mean to say something like that. I just was, it usually happens when I quote movie quotes in response to people, because I'll ask a question and my echolalia always goes to movie quotes first. And sometimes I pick the wrong quote and it gets me into trouble. But that's something I have to deal with all the time.
Yeah.
The other thing that I have to deal with all the time that drives me absolutely bonkers, because it just happened yesterday, is you go somewhere and you say that I'm autistic, and the compliment is, well, you don't look autistic. I'm like, well, what is autism supposed to look like? I haven't quite figured that out yet. But, that happens all the time.
I've actually heard that myself, throughout the years,
Yeah.
someone like, oh, I didn't know, they don't look like that. I'm like,
Like,
look, oh, we're not
right.
talking about, and no offense or not any, like, we're not talking about Down syndrome. Like, right when you see that, you
Mhm.
know that they have Down syndrome.
Yeah.
But it's not like you can look at someone like, oh, yeah, they have
Yeah.
autism.
100%.
So that's,
Yeah.
yeah. So for someone to make a statement like that is obviously
Misinformed and
ignorant.
yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe just don't know any better.
Yeah.
Which you could tell by when you talk to someone, you're going to know right away.
And if they say something like that and I can tell they're sincere about it and
Ex-
they want to learn more, that's a totally different
Exactly.
ball game than
Yep.
if they're trying to compliment you. I'm like how is that a compliment? I'm still trying to figure that out.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. And and you just got to find that balance. Some people are super sensitive and some people aren't, and you know, it's life. You just learn as you go and you just try to do the best you can. But
And how's life for you today?
well, I'm doing a lot of faking it lately to make it, because of my son passing, but it's hard, I go visit his grave every week, and I'm not gonna lie, it's hard, and I break down a couple times. It's getting better a couple times instead of like 50, but it's really hard. And then having two other sons that, I got to make sure that I'm, somewhat in the game for, even though they're struggling. So we've all been kind of like leaning on each other, but I know one day I'm going to be, fine. I just don't know if I'm gonna ever truly, truly ever
I
be
don't
happy.
know if you can be in that situation, like I lost my mother when I was 10.
Oh,
And even today, there are days where I like really miss my mom. Like you never
me
really
too.
get over that. And I can't even begin to imagine like just the grief and
Yeah, it sucks. And he was very, he was just a cool person,
yeah.
like he had his struggles like we all do, but at the end of the day, he was like a man of God, and he was just a good very he's just a mini me,
Yeah.
but a lot of his dad too. I don't take all the credit, but we were so much alike. He was just like my little ride or die buddy, and I miss him a lot. But I know that one day I just take it one day at a time. And
Yeah.
so I'm doing a lot better than obviously I was, like a month ago, but it's still hard. But, I know that I'm not the only person in the world who has lost a child. I just didn't think that would happen to me. So it still doesn't feel real. It just
Yeah.
doesn't. It,
Yeah.
it just, maybe when I get like the last part of his, that we're waiting on a toxology, like once maybe I can just finally just take a breath and actually really move forward. I think maybe that's what's kind of holding me back a little bit. And we're probably still looking at like another month before we can get those back. So I'm hoping, but every day I'm getting stronger and stronger.
And
So
I want to say something to you in this regard, right?
yeah.
Because I think it's important for you to hear this,
Okay.
right? I I would love for you to give yourself some grace and understand that you are stronger than you even know. Like I know some people recently who have lost their child that are just an absolute wreck, can't leave the house, can't even function even to the slightest. So the fact that you're here, that you're talking, that you're doing all of this stuff, I want to acknowledge how far you've come given the situation. And I think it shows people that there is something afterwards, right? And I think like I just wanted to commend you for how far you've come and say like I don't want to sound condescending or anything like that, but at the
No,
same time like I'm in awe and inspired by what you've had to overcome and where you're at.
thank you.
It takes a lot.
No, thank you. I really do appreciate that. And, like, I'm not going to lie, like a part of me felt guilty that I could get up, and do things that I'm supposed to be doing. And I kind of tell everybody that honestly, if I didn't have two other sons
Yeah.
that depend on, they don't depend on me, they're grown, but I got to be there for them too. I have 2 granddaughters, so it's like if I could have it my way, I probably would have just stayed in bed for days and days and days because that's how I feel on the inside. But the more I fake it and pretend like I'm fine, has kind of helped me,
Yeah.
But I just, yeah. So I, I feel for any parent who has lost a child, and I'm so new to the game that I don't want to be like, oh, like I know all this information about because I don't, and it's still I'm struggling. I'm struggling all the time. I fake it a lot, but I have great friends, and knowing that I know where he's at, and that helps. That helps so
Yeah.
much, or else I probably wouldn't be able to get out of bed either. So I feel for those parents as well.
And I want to close because we've been at this for over an hour now.
Really? It doesn't feel like it.
I know, right? And so I just wanted to say thank you for this conversation today. I know how much it took to sort of get enough confidence for you to come up and sort of talk about all this stuff. And I want to know, I want you to know how impressed I am and how much I appreciate our friendship, and that I look forward to 2025 and seeing how well we both can kick it and rock it and kick ass this year.
I totally agree. And I thank you so much for having me on your podcast. And, for what it's worth, you too.
Yeah.
Like, you're amazing. And, the work that you invest in this and that you put out in the community, like, it just takes one person to listen and hear the message that you're trying to, deliver that could change somebody's life. So I think you're doing amazing things too. And I'm like, I know, Sean, do you? Like, if you don't, then whatever. So from me and from the bottom of my heart, I thank you for just being you because you're amazing. And I can't wait to see what this year brings either. So I have a feeling it's going to be good things.
Kendra, thank you so much.
You too.